What is your worst experience of waking up after a one-night stand? Story 1. This is probably the best story I can tell. In 2004, I was following a band with a rather large fan base. Several hundred of us were part of the band's forum and decided to all rent out a hotel the night before their show. Many of us traveled there, including myself. It was about a 14-hour drive. I arrived much later than everyone else. The hotel was packed and everyone was partying. I had a huge bottle of Captain Morgan and started pounding it right away. I made my way down to the pool where a lot of people were hanging out, and one thing led to another with a girl there shortly after I got in. She invited me up to her room. We got to her room and were making out. She stopped me and said, "It's been a while and it's kind of rough down there. Do you want me to shave it?" I said, "Sure." She got up and went to the shower while I continued to drink. About 2 minutes later, I heard a loud noise. She had fallen down in the shower. I thought, "Oh crap." She jumped up and said, "I am okay." Then she fell again. I was like, "What the hell?" and went into the bathroom. She invited me into the shower and she kept doing her thing. When she was done, she asked if I wanted to shave mine too. I didn't see why not, so I proceeded. About halfway through, people started coming into the room. We all had 6 to 8 people in our hotel rooms, and the rest of her crew finally came back up from the pool. One girl burst into the bathroom yelling, "What the hell? What are y'all doing? Get the hell out!" I thought, "Oh crap, crazy lady. But okay, I will leave." I grabbed a towel and headed into the room to get my clothes. This guy immediately said, "Dude, you got dingle drapes all over my friggin' towel." There was really nothing I could do, so I just dropped the towel, grabbed my clothes, and hurried to the elevator. I was getting dressed in the elevator when I realized I didn't have my wallet, so I headed back up to their room. I knocked on the door, and she answered with my wallet. She still wanted to spend the night with me, so we went back to my room. My room was totally packed. Nowhere to lay down at all, so we decided to just wing it and see if we could find a place near the pool or outside. We both went to the front desk, requested some extra pillows and a blanket, then headed outside. The pool area was way too lit up to pull it off there, so we started walking around the parking lot looking for something else. We found it, made a little bed, did our thing, and passed out. I was extremely hungover the next morning. The fact that I was riding around in the back of a U-Haul didn't help. I grabbed my clothes and opened the door. There I was, standing with the left side of my dingus hairs removed for everyone in traffic to see. I jumped out, ran, and never saw her again. Summer of 2004 in Atlanta. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. She left quietly in the morning, and I was too hungover to move. I couldn't tell you what she looked like, let alone her name. Eventually, I needed to take a leak, so I got up bare and hungover and stumbled toward the bathroom. That's when I noticed a used rubber on the carpet, but it was twitching slightly. My vision was still blurry from the night before, so I squinted, trying to figure out if it was actually moving. Then I saw what looked like 2 hairs sticking out of it. They kept moving toward me, and then I saw its ugly little head. A cockroach, rooting around inside a used rubber, exploring my leftovers. My wardrobe has mirrored doors, and in the reflection, I caught the full picture. Me, pale and zombie-like, staring down at a cockroach in a rubber. I took a year off drinking, starting that day. Story 3. The guy was a complete jerk to me the next morning, acting like it was somehow my fault that he'd spent the night with a total stranger. Later that afternoon, he called me freaking out because he had a sore on his downtown area. He was absolutely convinced it was from our action last night. He berated me, accused me of not disclosing an STD, I don't have any, and we used a rubber, called me all sorts of horrible names, and told me I'd ruined his life. I told him, 1, I am clean, and 2, even if I weren't, it's not like symptoms pop up within hours. If anything, he probably put me at risk. Logic, of course, did nothing. I finally got his hysterical bum off the phone, only for him to call me again an hour or 2 later after apparently speaking to his mother, which got him all worked up again. Cue more yelling, name-calling, and being labeled a whore. He went to the ER to have his area checked out. The diagnosis? just an ingrown hair. I did get a follow-up call informing me of this, but no apology. Then, after what I assume he thought was an appropriate waiting period of a few weeks, he had the audacity to call me again for boinking. I said no. Story 4. My friend told me this story. A friend of his had a one-night stand while completely drunk. They both slept wearing nothing. The next morning, he woke up needing to go to the bathroom, only to realize he had taken a dump in the girl's bed while they were both asleep. Still drunk, he started thinking of a smooth way to get out of the situation. He could have just run, but instead, he gently pushed the girl into the mess, cleaned himself up, and left. Just imagine that girl waking up, remembering the one-night stand, then realizing she's lying in that mess and thinking she must have been the one who did it, and that the guy ran off in disgust. Story 5. I woke up next to someone and immediately regretted the drunken decision I'd made the night before. I got up slowly, trying to be as quiet as possible, and started putting on my clothes, ready to leave. I got halfway down the staircase before I realized I was trying to sneak out of my own house. Edit. No, she was not my sister. What's wrong with you guys? It was some random girl I met at university. She had a really bad haircut and a pretty bad tooth-to-gum ratio, which earned her the nickname Lawnmower Donkey. Story 6. I randomly did it in a club with one of my college dorm neighbors downstairs. She wasn't bad looking, and the boinking wasn't bad either. We had breakfast together at a nearby cafe. Then I left. She kept texting me, making small talk, and I replied rather offhandedly. A few days later, I was having a drink with my buddies at a popular student pub when I saw her. She casually grabbed my hand and introduced herself as my girlfriend. I decided to play it cool. I didn't want to embarrass her since she was with her girlfriends. She sat with us and started talking, but it was obvious we didn't know much about each other. It was awkward as hell, and my buddies kinda got what was happening. Bad decision-making kicked in. I told her what she did was unacceptable and that we definitely weren't in a relationship. But she asked if we could meet and talk about it. I didn't intend it to be a date, but we had a nice enough dinner. She invited me to her room, and I didn't go. I went to sleep instead. At 3 in the morning, she showed up drunk. We ended up doing it again. The next morning, I woke up to her casually chatting with my parents on Skype. They usually called on Saturday mornings and officially introducing herself as my girlfriend. I immediately abandoned all niceties. Story 7. We slept in her bed, which was actually a cot in the kitchen. Clue number 1 to stop drinking so heavily. She woke me up to introduce me to her 3 children. Clue number 2. They were all sleeping in the same bed because the youngest had soiled the other bed during the night. Clue number 3. Later, when there was a knock on the door at 8 in the morning, she told me to hide in that same bed. Clue number 4. It turned out to be her sister, but still. She then introduced me to her pet lovebirds and said she would name one of them after me. Clue number 5. As I was desperately trying to get out of there, she took a stuffed animal from her youngest child's arms and handed it to me to remember her by. Clue Jesus Christ. I did not take the toy from the now crying toddler. If I hadn't needed a drink so badly after that debacle, I might have given sobriety a shot. Edit. At one point, the eldest child gave me a drawing he made. It was genuinely heartwarming and left me feeling conflicted. Also, we shared a ride back to her place with one of her friends. During the cab ride, I found out that her friend's son and I attended the same university. Finally, this all happened on Christmas Eve. Somehow, in my drunken stupor the night before, I had given her my real cell phone number. After I left, she called me 8 times before noon. I didn't answer. Each message got progressively more aggressive. That's pretty much the complete story. Story 8. I woke up with absolutely zero recollection of the night before, and so did the girl next to me. Just as we were piecing together the mystery of how we ended up in the same bed, she suddenly screamed that she was late to her grandmother's funeral. Next thing I know, I am driving her across town, dropped her off in a tiny dress, no shoes, and still drunk as hell in front of her entire extended family. I am from New Zealand and white, and she and her whole family were Maori. Now, if there's one thing you don't want to do, it's upset a big Maori bloke. Multiply that by a whole funeral's worth of them. I dropped her off, avoided all eye contact, and drove off like the car was on fire. Story 9. It was a planned one-night stand. The guy worked with me, though, in a totally different department. He was hot, and we'd been flirting for over a year. We finally made plans to meet up. He told me he lived alone, but close to his parents' house. When I got there, I found out he actually lived in this little summer house setup in his parents' garden. No toilet, no bathroom, just a bed, a TV, and a ridiculous amount of mess. It was gross, but whatever. Boys will be boys, right? We did it a few times, then went to sleep. When I woke up, the very first thing I needed to do was pee. His brother was in the main house, and he didn't want him telling their mom that he'd had a girl over. The guy was 22, his brother was 18, not exactly kids. He told me to just pee in the garden. So I stayed awake, dying for a wee, waiting for the first bus home since suddenly he didn't want to drive me anymore, even though he'd previously agreed to. I just left. 6 months later, he messaged me asking for round 2 because he missed me blowing his flute. I laughed and flat out told him no. Who the hell stops someone from using their loo? Story 10. I woke up to the girl saying, "You need to leave, right now." When I gave her a confused look, she showed me her phone and said, "My boyfriend just sent me this." I looked at the screen and saw a photo of the two of us, asleep in bed next to each other, taken from the doorway of her room. Needless to say, I got the hell out of there quick. Story 11. She wouldn't leave. She lingered in the living room, then followed me around the house, even after I mentioned multiple times that I had a lot to get done that day. I went out on the porch to have a cigarette. She followed me there too. I ended up texting my buddy, begging him to come over as soon as possible. He eventually did, and we left together under the pretense of grabbing a quick pizza. The place was just down the street, but we sat in the parking lot for about 20 minutes, hoping she'd take the hint and go. This was around 3:30 in the afternoon. We got back and she was still there, sitting on the porch. Look, I am not a hit-and-quit kind of guy. I am not shallow. Honestly, I might have considered something more serious if she had just taken the hint. Eventually, she left, but it was excruciating. Later, I texted her and said it was fun, but I wasn't really feeling it. She responded with a long message calling me a horrible person, saying I was bipolar, needed psychiatric help, and would never go anywhere in life. The irony: the night before, she had told me about all the medications she was on and that she was bipolar. I don't laugh at mental health issues, but the insult was ironic. Story 12. Her dad woke me up and told me his daughter had left the house, then politely asked me to hurry up and leave. I wasn't entirely sure what was going on, but I followed his request and left. I sent the girl a text saying I found it kind of strange, and honestly a bit rude, that she had just left me sleeping in her bed to go meet her friends on a Saturday morning. Then I met up with my own friends and we went swimming. While I was telling them about the weird situation, I got out of the pool and saw I had a missed call from her and a text message. She told me that during the night I had apparently stood up in her bed and peed all over her room, on the walls, the floor, everything. She said she had tried to wake me up multiple times in the morning but gave up and left because she was completely done with me. She was really hot, and I am way too ashamed to ever speak to her again. Story 13. Freshman year of college, I went to a party with my 3 friends. One friend had been hitting on this extremely pale girl with the brightest red lipstick, not a good look, who then introduced me and another friend to her roommate. My other friend took charge, flirting with the roommate all night. I was just interested in her chesticles and wanted to drink. Anyway, I got hammered and left the party by myself to go home. Halfway there, I got a text from my friend talking to the roommate, telling me to come back to the girls' room. In my stupor, I thought it was a grand idea. I got there and proceeded to make everyone laugh for half an hour, outshining my other friend, and ended up courting the roommate, sending my friend home. Long story short, I did it with the roommate on the top bunk, while my friend was with the pale girl below. The girl kept saying she had to work early in the morning, but she kept screaming, and we kept doing it. Her alarm went off around 6, and I either turned it off without realizing it or slept through it. We both woke up around noon, and she was late for work at the cafeteria. She left, and I was left with the pale girl and my friend. We all got up and decided to go to breakfast, where we arrived just in time to see the big jugged roommate get fired. She was part of a work-study scholarship, so this was a huge deal. She technically lost $15,000 in funding at this private college. She sat down where we were eating and proceeded to break down. I was in no condition to help her. I was still trying to piece together how I got with her. Anyway, it turned out I ruined her life, forgot her name, and my other friend really wanted to get with her and held a grudge for the rest of our friendship. All in all, not a bad night. But the pale girl dated my friend, and things were tense since she had to live alone for the rest of the year. Story 14. This didn't happen to me, but my friends and I rent a ski house every winter. Sometimes friends of friends tag along for the weekend. It's always been fine, and everyone gets along. One weekend, a couple of new guys showed up, and all they could talk about was drinking and getting laid. One unhygienic, overweight, obnoxious dude wouldn't stop bragging about his unbroken streak of getting laid on ski weekends across the nation. I forgot the exact number, but he claimed it was something like 45. We'll call him Pete. Anyway, a bunch of us went out to our favorite bar. About 30 minutes in, Pete and the new guys showed up. All night long, all you heard was, "Hi, my name is Pete." Pete must have hassled every single woman in the place, regardless of age, race, sexual orientation, or religion. I don't think I've ever seen anyone get turned down by so many women in one night. But he had no shame. He didn't care how pathetic or annoying he was being. Around 1 a.m., my friends and I got up to leave. Outside, a particularly obese young woman was throwing up what seemed like a month's worth of hastily chewed food. We all turned away and started walking to our car. A couple of seconds later, I hear, "Hi, my name is Pete." We all spun around in disbelief thinking, no friggin' way. But there he was, Pete, standing next to the newfound love of his life and a puddle of reeking chunky vomit. None of us could contain ourselves. Next thing we know, Pete and Puke Girl got in her car and drove away. Pete's two friends were nowhere to be seen. My friends and I laughed our butts off on the way back to the ski house until we pulled up to the driveway. Puke Girl's car was right in the middle of it. There are 2 couples' bedrooms in the house and one big room with a bunch of beds where my friends and I usually crash. The 2 couples who came with us were livid as we stormed the house to kick Pete and Puke Girl out before they got busy. Too late, they had taken the big room, and all you could hear was the loud stupor of their drunken smoosh. None of us wanted to go in there. We all ended up sleeping in the living room, scattered on the floor. The next morning, I got up and found a very hungover Pete sitting in the kitchen drinking coffee. He looked up and said, "Vutator, can you go into the bedroom and check something for me?" I asked what? "Can you check to see if she's ugly?" I gleefully recounted the whole sordid story in graphic detail. By the time I was done, Pete looked like he was about to off himself. Story 15. I woke up to his absolutely crazy female roommate vacuuming the hallway outside his room for over an hour. She kept ramming the vacuum into his door like she was trying to summon a demon through sheer passive aggression. Pretty sure her goal was to wake us up so I'd take the hint and leave. Instead, we woke up, looked at each other, and decided to engage in a little morning mattress mambo, while the vacuuming continued in the background, like the world's angriest white noise machine. Story 16. I met a girl at a show my band was playing and ended up back at her place. We did the hokey pokey 3 or 4 times that night, then finally crashed around 7 in the morning. I wake up at about 9, completely dazed and confused, and hear a guy kissing her and saying, "Looked like you guys had fun last night." It turns out, he was her boyfriend. And apparently, he'd been front row center for the whole performance. I didn't even know she had a roommate, let alone a live-in audience. Story 17. I remember ordering a pizza at my buddy's house from a bar. I remember the delivery girl coming back to the party after her shift. I remember taking a shower at her house and watching Narnia. I remember her locking her roommates out of the house because she thought they drank her private stock. I remember being bare when the roommate's boyfriend, who looked like he could be an NFL linebacker, burst through the bedroom door and came running toward me at full speed. I remember waking up to see the boyfriend eating breakfast with his girlfriend and her son. I shook his hand, and he offered me breakfast. I went home very confused. Story 18. I woke up to him saying, "Crap, my dad wasn't supposed to come home so early. I had just assumed he lived with roommates. He told me to jump in his closet, even though I was completely bare and my clothes were in the living room. I started to argue, but he insisted, so I got in and listened as they made small talk for almost an hour. I realized I really had to pee, but they kept dragging the conversation, and I was dancing around in there. Then the guy I slept with left for work, and I could hear his dad making breakfast and settling in. I panicked. How was I going to get my clothes? Screw my clothes, I thought. I will use his. So I grabbed what I could find in the closet, just some shirts, and I ran full speed through the house with my messy hair and a long shirt to my car. The dad yelled, "What the hell? Who are you?" Story 19. It was late at night, and I was on OkCupid when a woman I had barely spoken to asked me to come visit her at her apartment, 30 miles away. She was a professor, 10 years older than me, and Colombian. Of course, I said yes. As soon as I arrived, she poured me red wine and told me to whisper because her mother and aunt, both very conservative and religious, were staying with her. So we sat on the couch for about an hour, whispering first date small talk until she led me back to her room. We had the quietest boink of my adult life. Afterwards, she talked at length about the massive, delicious Colombian breakfast she and her family would make for me in the morning. I fell asleep dreaming about that breakfast. I woke up to her desperately shaking me, saying I had to leave. Still half asleep, I got up and started getting dressed, but then she begged me to jump out the window, despite the fact that we were on the 3rd floor. I kept trying to explain that there was no way I was jumping out of a 3rd-story window, but she was insistent. Finally, I calmed her down and said I'd just leave quietly through the front door. I crept out of the bedroom and turned into the hallway, only to come face to face with either her mother or aunt, who had burn scars across her face and was now staring at me with a mix of confusion and fear. I am pretty sure she didn't speak a word of English based on what I'd been told the night before. We stared at each other for a solid 15 seconds. Then, unsure what else to do, I gently shook her hand and said, "It was so nice to meet you." And then I quickly made my escape. Good times. Story 20. Not my story, but I will never top it, so I am passing it along. A friend took a work trip to Bangkok. No, this story does not involve ladyboys, with his boss and the boss wife. They were there for a week, working non-stop, so my friend didn't get much chance to go out. The night before their flight home, he decided to see the town a bit, not planning to go too wild. He ended up at a club, somehow drinking in VIP with the club owner and others, including a young British expat architect. My friend went home with the architect to her apartment, did their thing, and woke up at 10 a.m. Flight home was at 11 a.m. His iPhone battery was dead. He hustled back to his hotel to find his boss and the boss wife freaking out. He hadn't told them he was going out at all. The manager had opened his room door, found no wallet, money, or passport, and thought he'd been kidnapped. The police were there investigating. Everyone was pissed. The boss wife started beating him with her purse. My friend, rightfully so, offered to pay the difference in flight costs. This did nothing to quell the boss wife's rage. Worried about his job, but thinking this would never be accepted, my friend offered to pay for the entire trip. The boss agreed and actually made him follow through. TLDR, friend had a $6,500 one-night stand in Bangkok. Story 21. I woke up between a married couple. In college, I was casually hanging out with this girl from an engineering class. She was surprisingly cute for a girl in engineering. One night, she texted me to meet her at a party. I was already pretty drunk, but figured, what the heck? The party went well, and we went back to her place. She mentioned she had people staying over, but they were sleeping in the living room, so her room was free. We made out for a while, but ended up just passing out. The next morning, I woke up lying flat on my back, which is odd since I usually sleep on my stomach. There was also a lot less space than I remembered. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed a guy next to me, and the girl on the other side wasn't the one I'd fallen asleep next to. Apparently, the people staying over were her sister and her husband, who were in town for a football game. The girl's other roommate had people over unexpectedly, and they claimed the couch before her sister and her husband got back from the bars. So, in a drunken state, they just hopped into bed with us. She had gotten up to do something in the morning, so when I woke up, I was introduced to her sister and her husband. Story 22. It wasn't a disaster, it was actually a fantastic night. I woke up and realized the girl I was dating at the time was on her way to visit me. I panicked hard. I gave my one-nighter some ridiculous story as to why she had to leave, like it was time to go. Unknown to me, she was visiting her friend whose room was across the friggin' hall. She kissed me goodbye, turned around, and walked 5 steps into the room. I immediately knew this was going to be a bad morning. The girl I was dating arrived no more than 5 minutes after the one-nighter left. She knocked on the door, I rushed her into the room, and then I heard from across the hall, "Frigging a-hole." And yeah, she was right. I felt terrible. I told my girlfriend right then and there that I made a mistake and we couldn't date anymore. She got extremely pissed and stormed out. It was one of the worst feelings I've ever had. The guilt left me feeling pretty down, but it was a lesson in the what not to do ever again category. Life lessons are a bish. Story 23. I didn't exactly wake up, but I had a moment of sudden clarity midway through that made me nope right out of there. She was larger than what I'd usually go for, but I was drunk as hell, and just in that mindset of wanting anything. I'd never been with a BBW before and figured I should at least try it once before ruling it out. We fooled around for about an hour, but the more we got into it, the more sober I became with each touch, the cellulite on her legs, the rolls on her hips, even her back. When she turned around, her cakes looked huge, and the back of her legs were like balloons filled with scrambled eggs. That was my breaking point. I told her I'd had too much to drink and didn't want to get sick all over her apartment from the motions. Got out of there, went straight to McDonald's for breakfast and a strong coffee. That night confirmed something for me. Big girls just aren't my thing, even drunk. Story 24. I went out to a bar in a small town in Nebraska and woke up the next morning next to some Irish guy. He kept stroking my hair and telling me he couldn't believe he had met me and that we were together. I actually replied, "Whoa, homie, what's your name? Where am I?" His name was Kevin. I had to block his number after he sent me 6 or 7 text messages that next day proclaiming his love for me. Don't let crazy stick their sticker in you. Story 25. I was having a drink at a bar on a work trip and ended up chatting with this guy for a few hours. Eventually, he asked if I wanted to go back to his place. I said yes, and he showed me around a typical suburban house with furniture, a kitchen, and all that. Then we went to his bedroom, and it was decorated entirely with cheap stuffed animals you'd get at a fair: bears, unicorns, horses, pigs, everything. He had so many that he built shelves all around the walls, with the smallest animals on the bottom shelf and the biggest ones on top. No lie, there were probably 1,000 of them. I had to go outside and smoke a cigarette. Thank God he didn't smoke because I needed to collect my thoughts. The thing was, everything about this guy was normal. He had a nice house. We sort of knew the same people in his field, and he wasn't married. He just seemed like a decent person who was totally unashamed of his stuffed animal collection. The more I thought about it, the more I admired it. I figured he must catch a lot of crap from his friends, so I started finding it attractive. I hate to say it, but I even started thinking about a relationship. So I came back inside, and we ended up having pretty decent time for being drunk and having a one-night stand. We finished, and I put my head on his shoulder and asked what he thought about it. "Go ahead and take a prize off the bottom shelf," he said. Worst one-night stand ever. Story 26. I was studying abroad for a semester in Brazil, and the university had one night each week where local students would take us exchange students out. Usually, it was a bar, a club, or just some casual beachside sips. One night we hit a club, and for some reason I overindulged far more than usual, my first full-on blackout. I woke up the next morning in a strange bed, strange room, with a very cute Brazilian girl beside me. She woke up, and it quickly became clear that she didn't speak a lick of English, and my Portuguese at that point was basically just smiling and pointing. My wallet had vanished, my shirt looked like it had survived a minor jungle skirmish, and she was feeling frisky enough for another tango in the sheets, which I happily obliged, mostly so I could remember it this time. Then I realized I was in a part of the city that wasn't exactly known for friendly tour guides. I had to fire up her computer, use Google Translate to ask her to call me a cab, and then awkwardly request a loan for the fare back to my dorm. Oh, and replacing credit and debit cards while abroad, an absolute walk through a bureaucratic swamp. Moral of the story, doesn't matter, got to do the horizontal cha-cha. Story 27. She told me I could sleep in since she was heading to work early, just to lock the door on my way out. Well, her estranged husband decided to make a surprise appearance. He walks in, sees me in bed wearing nothing but confidence, and gets all hot under the collar. He starts ranting about how she's the worst person since unsliced bread, and oh, by the way, did she happen to mention she's married and has a kid? I start getting dressed. As I am lacing up my shoes, he grabs the old-school TV/VCR combo and heads for the door. I go, "Hey, don't swipe her TV. She's gonna think I did it." He did not give a single flying fig. Story 28. Was hanging out at a local spot a few years back and met a girl who, according to about 10 of my closest cocktail consultants, was pretty easy on the eyes. We chatted, vibed, then headed back to her place. A bit of enthusiastic patty cake ensued, and I knocked out shortly after. Next morning, I spot a book bag, some textbooks, the whole scholarly setup. I ask what she's studying, and she hits me with, "I go to the local high school." My soul quietly exited stage. Left, I got dressed at the speed of light and dipped. Ran into her a few weeks later, and it turns out she was just messing with me because wanting me out of the house before her roommates came home. Story 29. Not me, but my flatmate. He struck gold one night while thoroughly marinated. He woke up the next morning feeling rather pleased with himself, realizing he wasn't alone. Still basking in the afterglow, he offered to cook her breakfast and nobly set off solo to fetch bacon and eggs. Alas, fate had other plans. After 2 hours of knocking on random doors, he came to the grim realization that he had absolutely no idea where she lived. He eventually trudged back to our delightfully stinky flat and made breakfast for the two of us instead with a heavy heart and the bluest of balls. Bonus twist, I'd almost forgotten. While he was walking to the shop, he called me and said he couldn't remember if her name was Emma or Anna. Then, in a full-blown panic sometime later, he rang again asking what 2 names he'd told me, having now forgotten both of those as well. Story 30. I went back to this girl's place completely sloshed. I vaguely remember it looking like a church, and well, turns out it was. She was interning at the local campus chapel and lived in a tucked-away apartment on the 2nd floor. Basically, the next morning, Sunday of course, I had to ramble through a walk of shame past a bunch of people attending morning mass. Story 31. I had a crazy one-night stand right after high school with the teacher's pet girl who I thought always hated me. Since I was still at my parents' place, I snuck her in. The next morning, my dad walked straight into my room to grab my keys to move my car for some reason. I was completely bare, half covered, and the girl was lying on her back, still asleep and uncovered. The look I shared with my dad in that moment was a mix of "good work, boy," and "you're in so much trouble." I had to grab a blanket and take my keys downstairs where he was waiting. After that, he put a lock on the liquor cabinet. Story 32. I spent the night with a cougar from the bar where I worked. The next morning, I woke up to noises coming from the kitchen. She said it was her son, and for some reason mentioned he was starting a new job that day. I gave him a quick hello as I left the house. Guess who showed up at my work for training later that day? It was the son. I had to train him. Story 33. On the first day of my holiday in Prague, I met this girl at a bar, and as you do, went back to hers. The next morning, I woke up and realized I didn't remember where I was staying. She told me to catch a tram to the city center and maybe I'd find it from there. The problem was, I had no idea what the city center looked like either. So I just winged it, and apparently I must have some homing pigeon genes, because I picked a direction and before I knew it, I was back at where I was staying. Honestly, I thought I was going to die in that place. Story 34. After a night of binge drinking tequila and getting thrown out of no fewer than 3 bars, my new acquaintance decided to get us a ride back to her place by walking out into traffic and jumping into the first car that slammed on its brakes. I remember a brief moment of clarity and doubt as she was beckoning me from the back seat, but the tequila quickly squashed that. Next thing I knew, I was in one of the strangest apartments I've ever seen. Every inch of wall space was covered in random animal furs and strange objects. I spent a good 15 minutes wandering around, wondering what the hell had happened. I checked the bed 3 times to see if I recognized her, but she remained just as much a mystery. She was really hot, though. Thank God. Eventually, my memory started coming back around the same time she woke up. She asked if we had done it. I wasn't sure, but judging from the lengthy scratches on my back, I said I think we did. She was upset she didn't remember and wanted a redo. Story 35. I met up with this single mom, let's call her Amy, who I later found out lived with her grandmother. After scratching each other's itch a few times, Amy and I passed out. I woke up to her lightly shaking me, telling me to silence my loud phone alarm. Apparently, her grandmother didn't want strangers in the house, but it was too late to just walk out. Granny was already up sitting in the living room and complaining about the AC temperature. Amy had to sit in the living room, positioned so Granny would look at her when talking, while I snuck past like a high school senior football player trying not to get caught or shot at by my dates. Watchdog father. Good times and a great adrenaline rush. Story 36. I woke up thinking I'd had a dream that I'd had spent the night with a girl, then rolled over and saw a guy in my bed. I sat up and noticed about 3 used rubbers on the floor of my bedroom. I poked him awake and asked him to leave. I didn't remember his name or how we even got into that situation. A few hours later, he added me on Facebook. He was in a relationship. His girlfriend was in his profile picture. Safe to say, I didn't accept the friend request. I saw him out the next week, and he tried it on again. I just said, "You have a girlfriend." I went to a pretty small university, and I'd see them walking around together. It was awful. I felt terrible. Edit. I am a woman. I know it's a bit ambiguous from the story, but I've said it in a few comments. Just wanted to clarify here for anyone confused. Story 37. I woke up to the sound of someone banging loudly on the door. I peeked through the curtains and saw a man mountain covered in tattoos, nearly tearing the door off its hinges. He was screaming, calling her names, and demanding she open the door. Apparently, one of his buddies had seen us leaving the club together the night before. She was nowhere to be found. I threw on my clothes as fast as I could and ran downstairs, only then realizing my shoes were by the front door, just a few feet from this furious giant still hammering away. Screw it. I bolted out the back door and ran barefoot as fast as I could, all the way to the bus stop. I jumped on the first bus I saw, and as we pulled away, I spotted her walking back toward the house, carrying croissants and pastries for breakfast like nothing had happened. Never been so scared in my life. Story 38. I spent the night with this super hot chick at a festival. She lived nearby and insisted we go back to her place. After an entire morning and almost afternoon of loud, crazy boinking for hours, I decided to go downstairs for a drink. Turns out she didn't live alone, like she said. She lived with her 2 brothers, both of whom looked like they had been on the juice. I casually continued my shirtless stroll to the fridge and then introduced myself. Both jumped off the couch and started grilling me, asking who I was and where I was from. She came downstairs, introduced me, and then asked them to drive me home. Being the older sister, they had no choice but to say yes. Since I was super far from home, I had to accept the offer, so I ended up getting a lift from the brothers of the girl I'd just frizzled the life out of all night. Story 39. You know when you wake up, look over, and instantly regret the person lying next to you? I tried that, except I was the whale, and she had the regret. It was clear immediately. We had both been really drunk. I didn't know her name, and I didn't remember how I got to her place. She didn't even talk to me, just pretended to be asleep while turning more and more of her back to me. Being a guy, small clues like that weren't obvious to me, but a stern no when I asked if she wanted to meet up someday got me on my way. At first, I felt bad. I was hungover, in a part of town I didn't recognize, and a girl had just kicked me out. But it was a beautiful sunny day, and as I found my way home, I slowly started to feel better. Hungover as I was, I decided it was a great time for a haircut. After getting my hair fixed, I felt great. Story 40. My then-girlfriend came over and told me she was sleeping with someone else. Devastated by the news, I decided to bin her off and go out chasing tail. Somehow drunk, I ended up with a girl and we headed back to her place. I was about to say goodnight and leave it there since I was feeling pretty fragile and only lived 10 minutes walk away. She asked me, "Where do you think you're going?" and took my hand, leading me to her room. We went in and did our thing, and shortly after, she told me she was a virgin. I felt pretty bad, but shrugged it off. When I woke up the next morning and realized what I had done in my heartbroken, drunken state, I felt awful. I didn't really want to see her again, but felt duty-bound since I was her first. I saw her a couple of times after that, but it was just awkward. I was all over the place. My worst and only one-night stand. Story 41. There was this girl at my university who I talked to casually. She wasn't exactly the type you'd find attractive, but when you're in the mood, you kind of don't mind her. I kept my distance, though, but she was tall and had long legs, which is what I like. Fast forward to after the semester, she had a little party at her apartment. After everyone left, we started making out. She suddenly stopped and asked if I was planning on getting serious with her. I pretty much said no. She seemed visibly upset. I offered to leave, but she said no, and we went ahead anyway. Pros: best popsicle tasting of my entire life. Cons: worst sleep of my entire life. She had a Tempur-Pedic mattress, and I am used to a stiff mattress and a buckwheat pillow. Plus, it was hot as hell, and she didn't want to turn on the AC because the noise kept her awake, which is the opposite for me, as I need noise to fall asleep. At around 5:30 in the morning, she finally gave in and turned on the AC, and I passed out immediately. Fun fact, I slept so badly that I pinched a nerve in my neck and couldn't feel part of my arm until I went to the chiropractor. But 10 out of 10 popsicle tasting would definitely do again. Story 42. I was in Dallas for work, and a young attractive girl came up to me at a bar. Zero effort needed to land her. She asked if I wanted to go back to her place for coffee, and only coffee. After arriving, she had no coffee. Shocker, her bed was a mattress on the floor in the living room, and taped to the wall next to it was a rubber. It was a one-bedroom place, so she clearly had a roommate. After having fun and laying around the floor in the living room in my boxers, a rattle at the door startled me. I jumped up to put on clothes, and this huge biker guy with tattoos and a leather jacket walks in. I immediately assume it's her boyfriend, and I am about to get hurt, but instead he just looks at me with eyes of shame and just shakes his head slowly. It was then that I realized this guy probably comes home to this all of the time. I am glad I used that rubber tape to the wall. Story 43. I've only had one in my life. About a year after an ugly breakup from a 4-year relationship, there was a guy I dated off and on, but things weren't progressing and I was ready to get back on the horse. One night, I went out with my friend who was dating a guy from England. A crew of them would be sent over to work at a big manufacturer in town, cheaper than locals, I guess. Anyway, this guy started laying it on thick, and when you add a great accent to flattering words, I thought, what the hell? I am young. It's been almost a year. This guy knows my friend's boyfriend. It's all good. I went back to the hotel where the company put the guys up and proceeded to have a wild 2 to 3 hours of boinking. I was tipsy and afterwards thought, what did I do? I was a good girl and had only been with my ex before. So I decided the best idea was to walk home. He was passed out. It was maybe 1:30 in the morning by this point. As I stumbled down the busiest street in town, cars honked and guys leaned out windows hollering at me. I got spooked and called my poor roommate, who was scheduled to work at 4 a.m., and bless her soul, she came to pick me up. The worst part, when I got home, I showered and was cleaning up when I realized the rubber had come off and was left with me. That terror is something I never want to experience again. This was the mid-90s, and AIDS panic was still pretty big. Not only had I had a one-night stand, but with a foreigner, which made it seem even more risky. Turns out everything was fine health-wise, but he did find out from my friend where I worked and would casually come by trying to convince me to go out with him. Story 44. This happened about a year ago at my fraternity's formal. For those who don't know, it's basically prom. You bring a date, get drunk, dance, the usual. I had never actually met my date before. One of my fraternity brothers set me up with her. She came over to our place to pregame with my roommates and their dates. She was smoking hot, easily a 9 out of 10. I was really nervous, so I started pounding tequila. I barely remember getting to the formal, but apparently it was going really well. We started dancing, and at some point we were getting it on the dance floor, so we got kicked out. We grabbed a taxi and headed back to my place. Once in my room, she started geeking out over my posters, especially the Game of Thrones one that said, "The North Remembers." We ended up having a really loud match about 4 times, thinking no one else was home. Afterwards, we were both starving, so I offered to cook. Still believing the place was empty, I headed into the kitchen, wearing only a shirt to make some lasagna. That's when my roommate's girlfriend, let's call her Elle, walked in. She's one of my best friends. I stood behind the kitchen island, which is about waist height, to hide the fact that I was pantsless, and we started having a casual conversation. Then my date, let's call her Kay, came out fully clothed, saw me talking to Elle, ran over, hugged her, and said, "OMG, you're really hot. Let's have some fun." My very drunk roommate walked out, saw Kay trying to make out with his girlfriend, and told me to control her. I was still bare and just said, "Nah." Eventually, I had to step in, which meant stepping out from behind the island, revealing everything. I got Kay back into my room, but the entire time she kept yelling, "The North Remembers," while I tried to find pants. I finished cooking. We ate and went to sleep. Later, Kay got cold and asked for another blanket. I didn't have one, so still drunk, I knocked on my roommate's door to ask. Litter said, "Come in." I asked for a blanket, but she lifted up the sheets and drunk me interpreted that as an invitation to join. So I said, "I love you guys," and crawled into bed with them. My roommate, thinking I was Elle, put his arm around me and cuddled up. It was a small bed, so Elle went to sleep on the couch. I woke up to my roommate screaming, "What the hell?" when he realized he was spooning me. Everyone got up and went to the living room while Elle explained everything. Then Kay, for some reason, got mad at my roommate and tried to scratch him. I was laughing too hard to do anything about it. Eventually, I drove her home and never talked to her again until the next semester when I found out she was on my soccer team. Now, every time she sees me, she just says, "The North Remembers." Story 45. A few years back, I'd been chatting with an older woman from Oak Cupid. Let's call her Karen. She was recently divorced, had a young kid, and was looking for a casual meetup. After a few nights of back and forth, she invited me over late one night for I assumed her kid was at his dad's for the night, so I went over. We did it like crazy, not caring about the noise or the fact that her bed creaked like an old gate in the wind. We finished and fell asleep, both of us bare. The next morning, I woke up and noticed another person in the bed with us. Her young son had climbed in at some point after we passed out. Turns out, he'd been in his room all night, not at his dad's like I'd thought. I woke Karen up and shot her a look that basically said, "Holy friggin' crap, this is awkward." She got up, picked up her son, took him back to his room, and this time locked the bedroom door behind her. Still not sure why she didn't do that in the first place. Story 46. Not really a bad experience, just inconvenient. After a one-night stand, we woke up and I told her I had band practice, which was true. I didn't want her to feel like she was being kicked out. So I told her to take her time and just pull the door shut when she left. Hours later, I returned to find her bicycle still standing next to my front door. I wasn't exactly in the mood to hang out with my one-nighter from the night before, so I drove off again and made an impromptu visit to my parents, still pretty hungover. Eventually, I came back around 8 in the evening and was relieved to see the bike gone. Finally, I could get back into bed and sleep. Story 47. I had recently gotten out of a relationship, and my roommate and I decided to throw an absurdly large party at our apartment. 3 or 4 bands played, and we charged people at the door whenever we felt like it, but mostly didn't. There were probably 200 to 300 people crammed into our decently sized college apartment. One girl caught my eye. We hit it off. The next morning, we discovered the rubber had definitely broken. To top it off, someone had drunkenly broken in through our front door using their head so it no longer locked. The place was such a disaster, I wasn't even worried about anything being stolen. If they took something, it'd probably just make the mess smaller. I felt it was the right thing to do to go with the woman to the student health office so she could get the morning after pill, which had recently been legalized but still had to be obtained through a doctor. On the way there, I found out that she wasn't just a student, she also grew up in the tiny town where our college was located. She mentioned that she knew basically everyone at the student health office, and they all knew her parents and extended family. I waited awkwardly while she made painful small talk with the nurses at the front desk, and then again while she went in to see the doctor. It was brutal. But we stayed friendly after that. And hey, no baby. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.